Yes.
My Lord, you recall the inquest of the Hoosen Haffejee?
I'll be with you just now, Mr. Vani.
Lord, before I commence, I'm advised that my learned friend of Mr. Gopal wishes to make a short application to the court.
Oh, okay. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, my Lord. My Lord, during yesterday's examination and cross-examination of Mr. Gopal,
Yeah.
it was put to him several times that he was entitled to state-assisted legal representation. But my Lord is aware of the circumstances under which I came to represent Mr. Gopal, which was as late as the 3rd, I think 6th of September this year, which was about a week ago.
Oh.
My Lord, under the circumstances and given what has been put to Mr. Gopal by Mr. Vani, it would be in the interest of justice that the state assist Mr. Gopal with the financing of his legal representation by the state. And in that regard, I would ask your Lordship to consider a directive to the effect that the state attorney funds and my representation of Mr. Gopal from the 6th of September until the finalization of this matter. I do understand, I think initially that his legal representation by state was refused on the basis that they were considering him a 204 witness or just a witness. But my Lord is aware of the fact that during the course of these proceedings, my Lord did direct that a legal representative for Mr. Gopal be present at court.
I think the refusal was made in error, as you say, believing that he would be a 204 witness. He was in no danger of being prosecuted, but
I understand both the prosecution, Mr. MacDonald and Mr. Vati, have no objection to such a directive being made by your Lordship.
Mr. MacDonald?
That is correct, my Lord. The state has no objection to this.
Sorry? The state is supporting the application.
Yes, it does. And considering the fact that Mr. V.R. Naidu was also represented, it would be just to do so.
Yeah, unfortunately, we had to ask Ms. Keshav to step in.
Correct, yes.
Because of the situation we were facing at the time, when it emerged that this witness would not be a 204 witness because of the type of proceedings that we are dealing with.
Correct.
And he did explain under oath as to what attempts he made to have legal representation. It was not out of his choice. It was actually refused.
Yes.
Legal aid didn't succeed. It was refused. It is on record. The state attorney also refused it because he might have been under the wrong impression that he didn't need one.
At that time.
It is evident he needs one now, so the state has to intervene. But is it the state attorney that must be given that directive?
Correct, Lord. Yes, that's my
State attorney.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Vani, do you? I know you raised this very sharply from the very beginning that this man might need legal representation. When it became clear that he would not be treated as a 204, he needed legal representation even more. And we had to ask Ms. Keshav to step in to speak to the witness to see whether she could represent him on urgent basis. It was on urgent basis. I don't know if you wish to add anything to this.
Yes, my Lord. In fact, even before the inquest started, we had approached the NPA and asked them to make sure that Mr. Gopal was represented
Yes.
at state expense. And it's certainly iniquitous that other former police officers can be represented at state expense, but not
Yes.
Mr. Gopal. Why should he be out of pocket and the others not? And certainly, why should Mrs. Keshav have to work on a pro bono basis when, in fact, Mr. Gopal was working in the course and scope of his employment with
Yeah.
the security branch at the time? I would only wish to add that the direction not only go to the state attorney, because the state attorney in turn has to be instructed by the
Yes.
State Department, but also the police, the SAPS legal services, General Chronovolt would also need to be a recipient of your directive, my lord.
Yes. Okay.
As a court user.
Well, Mr. Gopal, you have explained and advised us all the attempts you made to have a counsel to represent you in these proceedings, and all those attempts were turned down until Ms. Keshav was asked to assist you. It is only fair that you should also, or Ms. Keshav should not be out of pocket because of representing you. The state was supposed to have arranged for your counsel. It was turned down erroneously, it would appear. I'll therefore give a directive that Ms. Keshav be formally appointed as your counsel and that she be paid for the days that she started representing you, which is the 6th of September, up to the end of these proceedings. The directive should be sent to the state attorney and also to the South African Police Services section that deals with the representation for former police officers, because this happened whilst you were a police officer. So they must pay Ms. Keshav for her appearance on your behalf in these proceedings.
Thank you, my lord.
As the court pleases, my lord.
This directive may be transcribed separately and be sent to the state attorney and also to the SAPS. I don't know what unit that is, what department is
I believe
that?
the name of the unit is Legal Services.
Or legal, SAPS Legal Services.
SAPS Legal Services. And I believe the head of that unit is General Eleanor Chronovolt.
Yes, it must be directed to General Grunewald, who's the head of that legal services department. We could not do otherwise. We had to step in and make sure that justice is done for for the witness.
Well, perhaps my little friends for the state and Mr. Gopal can prepare a draft order for you to consider and issue.
Yes. No, she can do that, but I've already granted it, but it's just to put it in a formal way as a directive, an order that I'm giving.
Yes, it would presumably need to be stamped by
That's
the
right.
registrar.
Okay. No, that's all right. Okay, then.
My Lord, before we commence with Mr. Gopal, if we could just attend to a few housekeeping matters, and we also wish to hand up a few exhibits we have promised to furnish your
Yes.
lordship. On the question of the police files, my lord, we did receive a few files yesterday,
Yeah.
but I thought I would bring to your lordship's attention the files that we're still waiting for,
Yeah.
and those include General Sebastian Barcy Smith. And my lord, I'm looking at exhibit L2.
Yeah. Is it L2?
L2, yes.
Okay.
We're also waiting for Major Joseph Benjamin's file, formerly Munsami,
Yeah.
Sergeant Shumagam Govender, Captain Dan Hopt, Captain H.L. Skuri, and Captain Thomas Jacobus Bezuidenhout.
Yeah.
My Lord, I'm hoping that the investigating officers can furnish us with those files either today or latest tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you.
My Lord, in terms of what we wish to hand up, the first is a missing page from the record. My Lord, that is a missing page from the evidence of Constable Derek Nordia,
Yes.
who will either be hearing his testimony this afternoon or tomorrow morning. We managed to recover the missing page from a record provided by an attorney by the name of Mr. Ayop, who I referred to previously.
Yes.
My Lord, we've marked the missing page 346A,
Yes.
so that'll be in volume A, 346A.
Volume A. Yes. I just want to slot it in there. What page would
So, my Lord, if you can
At
go to
what
page
page?
346.
346?
Yeah, in order not to disturb the numbering, we just adding an A
346.
onto it.
346.
Yes. The other parties have been given the page as well.
Yeah, okay.
And then we have the following exhibits to hand up, my Lord. We've prepared a table of persons who died in security branch detention in the KwaZulu-Natal region. And we've marked that exhibit L13. My Lord, we prepared a report, a memorandum on Lieutenant General Lothar Paul Neetling. That was prepared by our private investigator, retired Brigadier Clifford Marion. The Lord will recall that Lothar Neetling was brought in by the police to provide expert evidence on the suspension and hanging, or alleged suspension and hanging of the deceased. And we will be alleging that Lothar Neetling was something of a rogue himself, having been implicated in various murders and attempted murders.
Yeah.
My Lord, the next exhibit is a copy of the affidavit of Dr. K.V. Mudley. My Lord will recall from yesterday that we were advised during the lunch adjournment by Dr. K.V. Mudley that he had a conversation with the late Hoosen Haffejee during 1997, just prior to the TRC hearings in Durban, in relation to the request by Mr. Gopal for money or compensation in exchange for giving information. Dr. Mudley, who's currently in London, has made out an affidavit which we'd like to hand up a copy thereof, my Lord, marked L15. My Lord, we've asked Dr. Mudley to courier the affidavit, the original, to our instructing attorney.
Yeah.
He will then lodge it with the court as soon as it arrives.
Okay.
And then, my Lord, the final affidavit, or rather the final exhibit, is the affidavit I referred to in evidence last week. It's the unsigned and undated affidavit of James Burrard Taylor in support of his application for medical boarding.
Yeah.
And I referred to an extract from that in my cross-examination yesterday.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Gopal, just remember you're still under formal oath.
Yes, my lord.
My Lord, at some point we want to flash up a photograph or two. Leonard Jr. reminds me that the TVs need to be switched on for that purpose. I can't hear you.
Yeah,
Apparently, Big Beats have the remote so that they can turn it on.
is the remote that side? Okay. Yes, mine is on now.
May I commence, my Lord?
Yes, certainly.
As the court pleases. Mr. Gopal, in your evidence in chief, you made reference to the training you received. You made mention of an orientation security course, which I believe took place in Benoni.
Yes,
You
my
recall?
lord. Yes, my lord.
And you said that you were instructed on who the enemies of the state were, both locally and internationally. You were shown movies, I think you described them as propaganda movies.
Yes.
And at the end of the training, you said that, and I quote, "You are a believer." What did you mean by saying that at the end of that training you became a believer?
My lord, at that point in time, by the time the training finished off, being young and you have no experience in the political field, so to speak, of South Africa, and you see this for the very first time, because I had no background history of South African politics as such. It's the first time I see this about the African National Congress, about the South African Communist Party, about suspects like Bram Fischer, various other suspects and organizations, the Irish Republican Army, the acts of terror taking place, etc., and the bombings in South Africa that took place, like in the early 60s, or yes, very early in the 60s, or was it later than that, and then acts of sabotage, etc. So at the end of the day, after training, you're a believer. You believe that because you've been conscientized. I was conscientized into believing that what the state is doing at that point in time to combat terrorism, that you become a believer. You tend to agree with what you're seeing. I mean, you see bombs exploding. You see the IRA doing the same thing in UK, in Ireland. Sorry. You see. There was also, from what I recall, the Russian Revolution that was shown. So at the end of the day, you come out as a believer that, look, what the state is showing you, that is true. So you,
Right.
yes.
So, you were a young, impressionable police officer, and in that training, they had said, well, we are facing a total onslaught against the country.
Those were the words used those days, the total onslaught.
Total onslaught. And to combat that, they had to engage in this total strategy to prevent this violent communist onslaught from taking over South Africa.
The fight against terrorism, the fight against communism, etc. That's what we got to fight against, because it is a total onslaught. Even I remember the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Pitt Botha, he would say that the total onslaught against South Africa, the total onslaught against us. And those were repetitive words. You hear it on national television. You hear about discussions in the office. So you tend to believe that, look, that is the total onslaught.
Yes. And am I correct in saying that, given you were facing this crisis situation, this total onslaught, that from the perspective of the state and its security apparatus, you would be expected to do whatever to combat that total onslaught and safeguard the country?
Absolutely.
And doing whatever it takes would include things such as committing crimes, conducting illegal activity, abducting individuals where necessary, torturing them.
Well, at Benoni, it wasn't put to us like that. It's only when I was back at the branch, and then when I saw like Joseph and Ludley being assaulted, etc., etc., and I truly believed that he was a terrorist, etc., and I see these wrongdoings taking place. I can't do nothing about it because of the act, etc. And then I said, no, well, the state must be right, because I'm a believer. In terms of my training, in terms of my conscientization, I believed that what was taking place was right at that point in time.
And since national security was at stake,
Yes.
what happened to Mdluli was, in a sense, at least at that time, justified.
The state felt that it was justified, but in terms of my eyes, what I saw, the police are there to maintain law and order and to safeguard and to guard people. But I'm seeing brutality. I'm actually visualizing brutality. That's why I went to Major Ben and I complained. And he says, no, keep quiet, you're sworn into the Official Secrets Act, etc., etc. You work on a need-to-know basis, etc. What you don't need to know, you don't need to know. But in terms of my understanding, that was wrong. It was an assault. But the state believed that that is the right way, and they continue.
Am I not right in saying that you might have been offended by the brutality of the assault on Joseph Mdluli, but that you did feel that a measure of third degree, in order to extract information that could save lives, was necessary occasionally?
I wouldn't accept that as, necessary on my part. But what I would say is that what was transpiring in terms of brutal assault, I felt very hurt about that. And I was duty-bound to keep quiet, and I can't say nothing. Because if I do say nothing and I put pen on paper, then that would go against me. Even with I made 13 applications to transfer myself out of the security branch, but that would end up in file 13. And file 13 is they tear it up into the waste paper bin. They will not let you go because you know too many secrets.
But those 13 applications don't appear in your personal file?
It should have. Well, that's what I'm saying. It ended up in file 13, which is the waste paper bin, referred to as file 13, which is the waste paper bin.
But surely they would want a record of attempts that you make to leave the branch, because when they do assessments, they want to see who you are and what you've done. Why would they want to throw those applications away?
Absolutely, my lord, because Major Benjamin was a thorough believer, and as far as the act is concerned, etc., I've got to comply with everything. Your transfer will not go through, it will not be submitted, it's going into file 13. Tear it up into the waste paper bin, and from the waste paper bin it goes into the shredder, and that's it. And I just got to I got to keep quiet.
Yes, all I'm saying is that typically an organization like the security branch would want a record of all your attempts to leave, even if they were rejected, so that when they look at you for purposes of assessment, they have a complete picture of who you are. So I just find it odd that they wouldn't at least keep it in your personal file so they can see what it is that you've been trying to do.
Well, I know that one of my applications, which I think is the last one, my application to transfer myself out of the security branch to the National Intelligence Agency, well, service at that point in time, that was approved. So that should be in my file. The rest of it, I mean, I've seen it in front of me, being torn, waste paper bin, and then shredded. If there was a copy made, I mean, some of them I did not see them being torn and then shredded. But if there were copies made and kept and then filed, etc., I'm not aware of that. But I know that I did not get any transfer approved out of the branch back to the CREs or back to the uniform branch.
Can we just go back to the time of the arrest, Mr. Gopal? When did you first learn that, and I shouldn't call it an arrest because it was an abduction, but when did you first learn that the security branch intended to apprehend Dr. Haffejee?
I think it was on the morning, yes, it was in the morning of the 2nd of August, 1977. I think around about 6 o'clock in the morning we had to gather at the office. And that's when Captain P.L. Detroit addressed all of us.
And prior to that, that just came like a shot up of blue. You had no inkling of that?
About his arrest?
About the plan to abduct him?
About the plan to abduct him? No, not.
Well, the plan to take him for interrogation?
Not.
The monitoring of his tomato?
Yes.
I assume that the security branch had listened to the conversations from the tomato the day before, on the Monday.
Yeah, well, every day, even if it's Saturday or a Sunday, they would drive in to work and then listen to those calls. That was like an active operation.
And typically that was you listening to the conversations?
Some part of the conversation myself, some with Jimmy Taylor, some with Captain P.L. Detroit.
Right.
Yes.
But you were expected to listen to most of them, and when you couldn't, as I understand it, Jimmy Taylor would then take over?
Yeah, well, the duties were shared amongst three of us, but I had to listen to most of it. The reason being that I'm Indian and I'm like subservient. I've been instructed. But where Jimmy Taylor suddenly just comes, and says, "It's okay, Mr. Gopal, you can take a break," etc. And that's it. So then he just takes over. And then Captain P.L. Detroit would listen to those conversations as well. And then eventually he'd come back to me and tell me, "Okay, fine, Mr. Gopal, you can listen in." So that's what used to happen.
So the probabilities are, was that on the Monday you did listen to the conversations?
No, I remember that on the Monday morning, Major Bennett called me and told me that we need to be at the office by 6 o'clock. We got instructions, we got to pick up from Captain P.L. Detroit. So on that Monday, I did not listen to any.
Not Monday afternoon, not Monday evening?
No, because on Monday, after he was picked up, we went over to Brighton Beach Police Station. And then we finished off over there, like just past midnight, etc. And then the next day, I heard about his death. And then it was following up, like going to his flat and clearing up his flat, etc., etc. I was not instructed to go back to the recordings. Yes, so that's how it unfolded.
So when you listen to these conversations,
Yes.
You don't listen to them in real time, you listen just to the recordings?
Sometimes it was in real time. Sometimes, most of the times, it was recordings.
Right. Well, the reason I ask you is because there is evidence before this honourable court that at least by that Sunday, Dr. Haffejee had been in discussion with Dr. K.V. Mudley. He had told Dr. K.V. Mudley about his suspicions in relation to Mighty Governor betraying him. And, my Lord, if I can refer the court to the statement of Dr. K.V. Mudley. My Lord, it's in volume G at page 1470.
Yeah.
And in particular from paragraphs 12 onwards. So it appears that Dr. Haffejee visited Dr. K.V. Mudley at his parents' home in Pietermaritzburg on that Sunday afternoon, 31st July 1977. And Dr. K.V. Mudley advised Dr. Haffejee to leave the country immediately. And Dr. Haffejee, in fact, agreed to do so and would inform Dr. Mudley as he was on his way out of the country. So there probably was a high probability that when Dr. Haffejee returned to his flat on the Sunday evening, he may very well have been discussing his departure, his imminent departure from the country, and he may very well have had similar conversations on the Monday as well. And so I want to put it to you that, in all likelihood, that's why the sudden decision was made to apprehend him first thing Tuesday morning. And that's why it came out of the blue.
Well, I wouldn't put that, past what you've just said. Surely Sunday's call recordings, tomato recordings would be recorded. If listened to early Monday morning and whatever's said over there and a decision is made immediately to have the person arrested, then yes, I would agree with what the court has to say.
But why else, after 4 months of monitoring him, when there were so many opportunities to apprehend him, as we discussed at length yesterday,
Yes.
why suddenly, on that Tuesday morning, that they decide to apprehend him without first making sure that the individuals that they could have apprehended as well, possibly in the cell, on the version of the police, may very well have been involved in bomb-making activities. They abandon all that and suddenly decide to apprehend Haffejee on his own, out of the blue.
Well, if Detroit and Jimmy Taylor, if they picked up any information about Dr. Haffejee's imminent departure from South Africa, or trying to escape or whatever, that one, because I did not hear that part of the conversation, but what I'm saying, had they picked that up on the telephone, I'm just saying that, or even on the tomato, that doctor is going to leave South Africa, he's going to escape, then that becomes imminent. Then I'm just saying that possibly led to the sudden arresting, kidnapping that took place. That's what I'm saying.
Yes. I mean, that would seem to make sense, because we really don't have any other explanation for the sudden decision to apprehend Dr. Haffejee.
Sure.
If we can just return to your statement. You mentioned in paragraph 62, Lord, that's at page 1749 of volume G.
Yes, my lord.
So in that paragraph, you give an account of the torture you had seen, with it being relentless and extremely brutal, him being thrown against the wall, Taylor punching him, slapping him, kicking him. It was a violent and continuous assault, and you also mentioned that Schroed's governor was also punching him. You say Munsami returned late in the evening. Can you recall the role of Munsami in that interrogation?
Munsami, from what I recall, he walked in and out of the interrogation room. He wasn't like staying there permanently, but he was in for a moment and he walked out. He went out onto his radio. I know he had his two-way radio with him, and then he came back. And then he went out again.
And what about Veera Naidu? What was his role in the interrogation? Veera Naidu?
Veera Naidu? Oh, no, they were just... No, Veera Naidu wasn't there. He wasn't there.
Well, he does place himself at the interrogation, although if my memory serves me correctly, he says it took place at Fisher Street.
No ways. No ways, my lord.
So he's mistaken, is he?
I would say so, my lord.
We can then turn to the next paragraph. You say that, that's paragraph 63, Haffejee was bleeding, shaking, and could not stand.
63.
Yeah, it's the very next paragraph on the same page, 1749.
Yeah, 63.
You say he was bleeding, shaking, and could not stand. That was at lunchtime. He could hardly walk. I had to assist him. And elsewhere in your evidence, you mentioned that he couldn't even bend. And so when he was instructed to put his clothes back on, you had to assist him putting his legs into the underpants and trousers. So I want to ask you, given that on your version he was in that state, how was it that he was able to walk on his own to the charge office later that night?
Okay, he did not walk on his own. He was escorted by all of us.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not suggesting that he wasn't escorted.
Yes.
He walked by himself. He wasn't carried, in other words.
No, he wasn't carried.
So how could he walk unaided when he was in that dire condition?
Dr. Haffejee walked very, very slowly. He tried to straighten himself up, but just for a moment, and then he slouched. So, and then because Jimmy Taylor by then had brushed his hair with his comb, etc., made him look neat, took a towel or a handkerchief, then wiped the right side of the lip over here, and then made him look presentable. He had his safari suit put on, etc. But Jimmy Taylor had his left hand around his neck, at the back of his neck, and he's walking, and we all following him. Yes.
At the inspection in loco, and of course you weren't under oath then, but perhaps you can confirm the statement you made before the court now, because you are under oath presently. I recall you saying that Dr. Haffejee walked upright. He wasn't slouched or bent over. He walked upright from the interrogation room to the charge office, to which Dr. Steve Naidu, the pathologist, expressed his surprise. Do you recall that exchange?
I recall that, yes.
And are you confirming before the court today that your recollection is that he walked upright to the charge office?
He walked upright, but for a very, very short while. He couldn't keep himself upright because with the type of beating that he had received on his front, his chest and sides and back and kidney, even if you try to straighten up, you're going to feel pain, so you're going to bend slightly. So he slouched slightly, and then he walked very slowly, like virtually crawling pace, escorted by all of us.
So,
may I please sit?
Please do.
Thank you.
So in fact, he wasn't really walking upright. He was most of the time crouched over.
Most of the time crouched over. He did walk straight for a very few, maybe about not even a minute or so, and then he slouched.
So in the middle of your paragraph 63, you then say, we then all went to the charge office and made an occurrence book entry and allocated a police cell for him.
Yes.
Why did you all have to walk with him? What was the... Why were you all needed? Well, first let me ask you, so how many of you escorted him from the interrogation room to the charge office?
Pierre Detroit, Jimmy Taylor, Shalud, myself.
4 of you?
Yes.
Munsami?
No, Munsami wasn't there at that time. He was, because I know that after he was put into the cell, Munsami was already in his car downstairs.
So 4 of you escorted him to the cell, and it's also evidence that you didn't have to carry him.
No, not at all.
You didn't have to perhaps just hold him on the side, perhaps.
Well, not me. Jimmy Taylor, I don't think Jimmy Taylor held him by his neck at that time because we had the charge of a sergeant over there, and probably he would wonder why is Jimmy Taylor holding him, because he's not a person who's escaping. Normally if a person wants to make a run or something, then you sort of hold him and accompany him. But he wasn't escaping, so can't really recall if Jimmy Taylor was holding him, but I wouldn't expect.
And if you were coming from the basement on the southwest corner, or even if you were in the other basement area, I'm correct in saying that you would have had to ascend a staircase?
Yes.
And he had no problem ascending that staircase?
I guess he would have done so, but very gently, very slowly. Not like normal walking pace, where you would just step by step by step and you're down. I didn't really take notice of that, but I think common sense would tell me that certainly with that type of beating, you would walk not even snail's pace, much slower than snail's pace, if the court understands me.
So 4 of you decided to walk him to the charge office, even though he didn't need to be carried or supported, and even though in the charge office it was the work of the charge office staff to enter the details into the occurrence book.
Yes.
So at least in theory, you simply weren't required. It could have been done perhaps with one of the security branch officers who would have given the details to the charge office staff, and then the charge office staff would have taken care of matters from there. So why all 4 of you saw the need to take him through to the charge office?
There was no special, like, so and so and so and so allocated to take him to the charge office. It's just that we all finished off with the questioning, with the interrogation, and then he had to be booked in, so we all accompanied him. That's it. There's no like rule as such, because I placed myself in the charge office. Jimmy Taylor is there, Shrewd is there, Pierre Detroit is there.
But typically, if you're not needed, particularly that it's now midnight or after midnight, if you're not needed, the interrogation is now over. There's no need for all 4 of you to take him through, so it's now superfluous. The people who are not needed would go to their cars and go home.
I understand what the court is saying. It does make sense, but what transpired is what transpired.
Yes. Well, I want to put it to you that the reason why it was 4 of you, and in fact it's the evidence, I believe, of Taylor, that I think there were, on his version, 5 were present. I want to put it to you that the reason why there were so many of you was because he had to be carried, given the state that he was in.
No, my lord. That is a lie. That is a lie. He was not carried at all.
And not only that, on your version, all four of you then accompanied him to the cell.
Yes.
Why? For what purpose?
That's how it panned out. That's how it unfolded. I mean, he was booked in to the charge office, to the OB, and then with the charge of a sergeant, all of us then went over to the cell. It's not a special, it's nothing special. It's nothing like, out of the ordinary. I mean, this was like early hours of the morning, just past midnight, and there's just four of us there with the charge of a sergeant, and so we escorted him to the cells.
Before we deal with what transpired at the cell, it was your evidence that he was wearing a short sleeve safari suit.
Yes.
So his arms would have been visible.
Yes.
Now we are going to flash up a picture of his arm. Because there's evidence from the pathology report, as well as a photograph that was taken. I believe that picture, in fact, is from the post-mortem itself. Now, you'll agree with me that a short sleeve would come to approximately perhaps halfway down the upper arm.
Yes.
My learned junior will find the pathologist's description of those particular injuries. But you will agree that if those injuries were visible, were on his arm at the time, they would have been clearly visible to anybody looking at the man. Can you see the picture on the screen?
Absolutely, absolutely, Lord. I agree with you, because obviously if you're wearing a short sleeve jacket, safari jacket, it probably ends up like a quarter way down your shoulder, and then the rest and the elbow and the arm is all exposed. So from what I see, those injuries over there could never have taken place, because his arm, the time when he was interrogated, because his arm was clear. The charge of a sergeant, the people booking him, would have seen injuries, would have seen those injuries, and they would have noted that in OB. So that's, yes, there has to be accountability for that.
My Lord, for the record, this is Exhibit B2 at page 823. Is it 823 or 853, please? 823. Did I hear you correct that when you escorted him, those injuries were not on his arm?
Were not on his arm. I would have seen them. I would have remembered something like that, exposed, like injuries like that.
So are you suggesting that at some later point those injuries were inflicted?
Yes, has to be. Injuries won't just like fly out from the fresh air and just lie on your shoulder. It's got to be physically, you have to be physically hurt for those injuries to appear. So that's, once he was put into the cell, thereafter what happened, that's where the accountability comes in.
So are you suggesting that he was further abused and tortured while in his cell?
That is the only other explanation, my lord, because trying to allegedly hang himself will not bring about those type of injuries. I mean, common sense would tell us that if you trying to hang yourself and you're twisting and you're coiling yourself around, you wouldn't expect open wounded injuries like such. That is physical damage to the skin. I'm sure the court understands me.
So, Lord, I'm referring to the expert report of Dr. Steve Naidu. It's at Exhibit G24,
Yeah. Okay.
paragraph 41, page 1594. Now, I'll just read this to you. The injuries to the limb appear to suggest a distinct pattern or set of patterns, and the possibilities of restraint, constraint, and specific natures of infliction are raised. The clustering and pattern of discrete lesions, those are injuries, around the elbows, and that's the picture we just showed you,
Yes.
and knees and at the low back cannot escape notice. They indicate a specific directed application of force to these individual areas, strongly suggesting some sort of restraint and constraint by an object or surface with a pattern configuration on its surface. It is difficult to reconcile with usual causes of injury. A sort of shackling or restraint of the deceased while alive must be considered, as this fits in with a fixation of the elbows and knees especially. So, given the expert view of Dr. Steve Naidu, it seems quite clear that those injuries were sustained under interrogation. And I want to put it to you that they were likely inflicted during the interrogation period and not while he was placed in his cell.
My lord, what I can clearly say, firstly, is that the time when he was taken to the charge office, those wounds were not there. And secondly, Dr. Naidu is a pathologist. I have a lot of respect for him. But with regards to technical information on his conclusions, I will not discount that, but I cannot comment on that because I'm not a specialist, a pathologist. But what I am saying is that if those injuries were there on his arm at the time when before he was booked into the cell, the charge officer sergeant would have noticed all of it, because he's not only been been searched or taken, or all his possessions are taken off, etc. But then they physically look at him. They look at him. If there's any signs of any injuries, then they would put that into the occurrence book. So at that point in time, I did not see any injury on that arm.
It's the evidence of the two surviving charge office policemen, Constables Meyer and Ludia, that he was injury-free, and moreover, that nobody had access to the cells after he was locked up just after midnight. They said that only they had the keys, and nobody was permitted to go in there.
Well then,
And nobody did, according to their versions.
well, I don't trust that statement because, yes, Constable Nodia, being the charge of a sergeant, was in possession of the keys, and Mr. Mayor had access to the keys as well. Was it Mr. Mayor or Constable Mayor?
Constable Mayor.
Constable Mayor had access to the keys as well, and the other person is Shabalala had access to the keys.
I think it was Madlala.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Mr. Madlala. I'm informing the court that something did take place. Something did take place. Because besides the normal, like routine examinations every hour after hour, somebody put on a shirt on him with a long sleeve, because I saw that yesterday. It was shown to me. He never had a long sleeve shirt. He had a safari top. So how did the long sleeve shirt get onto his body? Somebody went into the cell. Something happened over there. And, sorry?
So are you saying that those two constables, Nordia and Mayer, that they're covering up for what actually happened?
I'm saying that if they say that they did not go into the cells, firstly, that is a lie. Because they did go into the cells, hour after hour, through normal inspections.
Yes, the hourly inspections.
Yes. So they had access to the keys, they did the hourly inspection, etc. They had access to the cell. And when they say that they found him dead, then they probably did their normal investigations, etc., call the necessary people, etc. But they're the only ones who've got the keys. And that's it. So whoever came in thereafter, once he was put into the cell, I can't account for that.
Well, on your version, if your version is to be accepted, then you agree that Constables Mayer and Nordia would have had to have collaborated with whoever inflicted those injuries post-midnight.
I agree with you, my lord.
So they then fabricated a story that all was normal through those hourly inspections until the discovery at 4 a.m. That was a fabrication on their part.
I would say so, my lord.
Mr. Van, would it not be convenient to take a short break?
As the court pleases.
We proceed at 12 o'clock. Court is adjourned.
All right.
Gopal, you're still under formal oath?
Yes, my lord.
Yes, Mr. Barney.
As it pleases. My Lord, we neglected to hand up one of the exhibits this morning.
Yes.
My Lord, it's a letter from the NPA to the National Archivist in Pretoria. It's from Advocate Shibnam Singh. It was sent in late 2017. It looks like it was sent on the 29th of December 2017, in which Advocate Singh requests the detainee file of Dr. Hoosen Haffejee, together with a number of the other detainees and individuals who were under suspicion at the time.
Yeah.
My Lord, I think I'm correct in saying that my learned friend from the state will either confirm or not that none of these files were supplied to the NPA. I'd like to hand up this letter, my Lord, as Exhibit L17.
Did they respond to it though?
My Lord, I'm unaware whether there was a response. My friend for the state can advise on that score.
Okay. Have you marked it as an exhibit?
Yes, my Lord, L17.
Okay. Mr. McDonald, do you know anything about this exhibit?
No, unfortunately not, my Lord. However, I'm not aware of any files that were supplied to the state since the date of this letter.
Okay. You may proceed, Mr. Barney.
As the court pleases. Mr. Gopal, can you describe the relationship between the uniform branch and the security branch? You know, who was in the superior position, who was in the subservient position?
Okay, well, the uniform branch only came into play when the security branch had to detain their detainees in police cells at various police stations all over Durban and surrounding areas, Mamzintoti, maybe Potchefstroom, etc.
We don't need that detail.
Yes. Yes.
So, am I correct in saying, just to cut to the chase, that the security branch was at the top of the heap, seen as the elite force within the South African police?
Yes.
And am I correct in saying that they were actually feared by the other branches?
Well, the other branches of the, besides the uniform branch, the other branches of the South African police at that point in time.
Well, let me be more specific. Members of the uniform branch, particularly junior members of the uniform branch, if they were told to do things by the security branch, would they simply do it?
Yes.
Even if they were asked to do things that were irregular or even illegal?
I can't comment on that, but they would take instructions from the security branch members.
So if they were told to ensure that paperwork was not done by a security branch officer, they would likely carry out that instruction?
Likely.
Because on your version,
Yes.
Mr. Gopal, you are effectively saying that the charge officer staff that night
Yes.
somehow collaborated with the security branch in potentially giving them access to the cells after midnight?
Well, what I'm saying is that from the evidence that I saw yesterday with regards to Dr. Haffejee wearing a long sleeve shirt, that could have only happened after he was put into the cells, because at the point in time when he was put into the cells, he had his safari jacket. He did not have a long sleeve shirt on.
Yes, you've given that evidence. We don't need to go back there. That's
Yes.
we've heard that.
Yes.
But the question is, do you agree that the shirt and any subsequent abuse or foul play could not have taken place without some cooperation from the charge office staff members.
Understandably. Understandably.
Yes, there's no other way. They would
Yes.
have had to collaborate.
Absolutely.
And you're not suggesting that they went in and abused Dr. Haffejee on their own bat?
May I ask, for what reason?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, in your view, who are the most likely suspects who would have entered the cell post midnight?
I'd put it to Captain Jimmy Taylor. I'd put it to P.L. Detroit. I'd put it to Major Bobby Velman. I'd put it to Captain Andy Taylor. Because these were like the top 4 ranking people who were in the category of, let's say,
Yes, and they did not have keys to the cell, so they would have had to gain access by securing the support and the silence of the charge office staff.
I'd agree with that, my lord.
There's no other way that could have happened if that indeed happened.
No, because there's no other way of gaining access. You've got to have the key.
Yes, and so that's why I asked you.
Yes.
These young constables being confronted with senior security branch officers, and let's put up that version for a moment, if they're instructed to do things, you are of the view that they would simply carry out those orders without question.
I believe they would follow suit.
Now, let's return to the question of whether that injury on the arms could have been present or not, at least by midnight when he was taken to the charge office. Now, in your version, you're saying that those injuries were not there and they can only have happened post midnight, after you'd left the scene.
Yes.
Now, my lord, I want to make reference to the post-mortem report. That's Exhibit B1 at page 754.
754.
Yes, but if I can refer the Honourable Court, I don't know whether the witness has access to a volume B, but nonetheless I can just read to you what the post-mortem says. My lord, at Annexure D to the PM report at page 763, Professor Gordon, he deals with the time of death, the post-mortem interval, on the preceding page as well. But on the last paragraph in Annex D on page 763, he concludes that the death occurred 3 to 4 hours prior to his initial examination of the body at 06:59 hours, so around 7 a.m. in the morning. So effectively, Professor Gordon is agreeing with the police version that the death took place between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. In the morning. And then, my lord, if we look at Annex E, the very next page, it's page 764. Mr. Governor, that's the histology report that was annexed to the post-mortem report. And histology deals with the age of injuries. There's a way of examining the tissue to determine approximate time that those injuries were sustained. And my lord, that's set out at the bottom of the page in those paragraphs, subparagraphs A and B. And just to sum up, Professor Gordon says all the lesions in the category of abraded bruises. My Lord, we're advised that abraded bruises are those bruises that were caused by a sharper object, that they occurred within a period of 4 to 12 hours before death. And in the relation to the normal bruises, Professor Gordon concludes that they were probably sustained within a period of 4 to 12 hours before death. But there's a possibility that they could even have occurred earlier by some several hours. And my Lord, we're advised that the other category of bruises are those caused by blunt force. So Mr. Gopal, if we then do the calculations, most of the injuries, including the abraded injuries, would have occurred 4 to 12 hours before death on the version of Professor Gordon. And if we do the calculations from 3 a.m., that means they occurred between 3 p.m. and 11 p.m. The day before. And if we take 4 a.m. as the time of death, then they occurred between 4 p.m. and midnight. That's for the blunt force injuries. So regardless of the calculation, all the injuries in question, including the injuries on the arm, on the version of the post-mortem report prepared by Professor Gordon, puts those injuries as happening by the very latest at midnight, not after midnight. Do you have a response to that assertion?
Yes, my Lord. Okay. Professor Gordon is a pathologist, correct?
Yes.
Sir, yes. Scientific evidence, my Lord, I can't comment on that because I'm not a pathologist. I don't know how scientific evidence is calculated.
No, but again, I'm not asking you to comment on the pathologist's report. I'm simply putting it to you that that is what the pathologist concludes. Now, you can work out for yourself that the objective forensic evidence conflicts with the version you've put before this court. So do you have a response to that?
Yes, my Lord. I know that he was put into the cells past midnight, and that's it. So if he says that death occurred before midnight...
We're not talking about the death at the moment. We're talking about the age of the injuries calculated from time of death between 3 and 4 a.m. in the morning. So the age of the injuries suggests that, on the basis of Professor Gordon's report, suggests that the injuries were inflicted before midnight, at the very latest at midnight.
Well, my Lord, as far as the injuries on the body itself is, if we focus upon that, besides the arm, because on the arm there was no injury, because he was wearing a short sleeve shirt and safari jacket, and that would have been observed by the charge office personnel, who would look at him physically, and they would have noted down injuries. The other injuries on his bodies, yes, I mean, he was panel beaten. He was hit very, very hard. So if there's injuries prior to him going into the cell, obviously from 9 to 9:15 or 9:30 in the morning till just before midnight,
yes,
he was beaten very, very badly.
Yes,
so,
indeed, but the conclusion to draw from Professor Gordon's evidence is in fact that your version can't be true. The suggestion that the injuries on the elbow took place post-midnight cannot have happened?
No, I cannot accept that, my lord. I cannot accept that.
Well, let me take it further, because the two experts called by the state, Dr. Steve Naidu and Dr. Shakira Holland, their estimation of time of death based on the fact that the body at 7 a.m. was in a state of fully completed rigor mortis is that death took place before midnight. Now, if we do the same calculations, relying on the fact that the injuries were sustained between 4 and 12 hours before death, assuming that the death took place at midnight, that suggests that the injuries were then sustained between 11 a.m. and 8 p.m. And actually that seems to be quite consistent with your version of when the torture was meted out to Dr. Haffejee.
Well, from but 9:15 in the morning till just before midnight.
Yes. And my recollection is that the torture got progressively worse.
In the afternoon?
Yes. So
Yes.
That squarely makes it quite consistent with that estimation. And if we turn to the specific evidence of Dr. Naidu, Lord, he offered a range, but in his oral testimony, and in fact also in his report, that's G24, my Lord, at page 1626, paragraph 3b at the top of the page, Dr. Naidu said that, if he had to offer an approximate time of death, it would have been between 10:23 at night and 11:23 at night. And then if we do those calculations, working back on the 4-hour range to calculate when the injuries were sustained, we get to the following time ranges. The furthest back on the 12 hours, those injuries would have been sustained somewhat after 10 a.m., around 20 minutes after 10 a.m. in the morning, and the last possible time would have been around 6:30 p.m. in the evening. If one then turns to the expert views of Dr. Shakira Holland, Lord, her report is at G28. She estimates time of death as taking place between 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. So if one works back according to her estimation of time of death, again using the 4 to 12 hours range, if death occurred at 1 a.m. and the injuries were inflicted between 1 p.m. and 9 p.m., and if death had occurred at 7 p.m. in the evening, then the injuries would have occurred in the range between 7 a.m. in the morning and 4 p.m. in the afternoon. So what I want to put to you, Mr. Gopal, is that whether we rely on the expert reports of Professor Gordon, or whether we rely on the expert reports of Drs. Naidu and Holland, and they all don't dispute that the histology report is incorrect. So there's consensus that the injuries were inflicted between 4 and 12 hours prior to death. It casts some doubt on your claim that some of the injuries were inflicted post-midnight, because all of them, if you do the calculations on all of them, all the injuries would have occurred before midnight. And in fact, if one looks at your evidence, you've gone under oath and you said, well, the torture began mid-morning at least, and got progressively worse into the afternoon and evening.
Yes.
And that aligns precisely with the estimations of Dr. Naidu and Dr. Holland. So I want to put it to you that your claim that the injuries were inflicted post-midnight cannot be correct.
No, my lord. What you've just presented is scientific evidence based on a balance of probabilities. Mine is factual. I saw what I saw. I was there. I saw what I saw. I took him with the other members. We went to the charge office. He was booked in and was put into his cell. I was there. Mine is factual evidence. I'm not a scientist to base on a balance of probabilities. Sorry, mine is factual. I was there. I saw. He was booked in and taken to the cells. That is factual, sir. That's what I can say. But I'm not speaking a lie. I would never mislead this court.
Well, in order for the court to accept your version, the court would have to come to the conclusion that 3 pathologists got it wrong.
That's the court's choice.
I can just go back to the interrogation for a short period. In your evidence in chief, you said that you were not really part of the interrogation. You weren't putting questions. You said you weren't in charge. But that during a lunch period when the white officers were out, you asked them a few questions, in particular about Thursday night.
Yes.
Now, am I right in saying that you were the one mostly listening to the conversations and then writing up reports to hand up to Jimmy Taylor?
I was one of them. It was myself, Jimmy Taylor, P.L. Detroit, 3 of us.
Right.
But I was one of them, yes.
But my recollection is that it was mostly you, and when you weren't able to do it, then Jimmy Taylor would step in.
No, it's not that when I'm not or won't be able to do it. It's when Jimmy Taylor wants to say that, look, he wants to take over and do the listening. Sure, by all means. Then he called me back. Do the listening. Or if Captain P.L. Detroit want to do listening, go ahead and listen to the Tomato. Sometimes he'd hop over from the Tomato to the telephone line and listen to recordings.
But the default job was yours, and then,
yes.
And then thereafter the other two might come in.
Yes, yes.
So it stands to reason, of course, that you probably knew more about Haffejee than anybody else in that investigation. You were doing most of the listening.
Well, what I heard is what I heard, and that's what I told the court.
No,
I mean,
that's not my question. That's not my question.
yes.
My question is that you knew more about this case than anybody else. Because
Probably.
you did most of the listening.
Probably because when you say most of the listening, probably because there's lots of parts of the investigation that I did not hear on the tomato, as it was listened to by other members.
Yes, but the other members would be in an even worse position because compared to you, they didn't hear as much as you had.
I can't, like, put a percentage.
Well, I'm not asking you for a percentage. I'm simply putting
sure.
it to you.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes, but now the court must also understand that for me to be 100% accurate that I know more than the others, that would be a wrong impression. What I am saying, there's a possibility that I've learned more about this than the others
Yes.
because of my time span.
Well, it stands to reason that whether it was you or somebody else, if anybody had been doing the bulk of the listening, then whoever that was, in this case it was you, would know more than others. That's just
Okay.
a straightforward logical deduction. So I want to put it to you that given you knew more than anyone else about the activities of Dr. Haffejee, you were very well placed to put questions to Dr. Haffejee. You knew when he was being truthful and when he wasn't, more than the others did.
Okay, to that I would say that everything that was taken down was put in writing and it was filed, and Captain P.L. Detroit had the file with him. So he's got access to everybody's information, every investigator's information.
Well, I'm just saying that it's terribly unlikely that the only question you put to him was during that lunchtime on the question of Thursday nights. I'm putting
But
it
that's
to you
what I
that
did.
the probabilities are that you were part of the interrogation and you were putting questions
Well,
to Dr. Haffejee.
Well, I did not deny that. When Mr. MacDonald had asked me that, I said, sure, yes, I was part of the interrogation team because I had questioned him. But that's what I questioned him about. When Taylor and the Detroit came back, they take over. But that was all because my duties were subservient. And I had to stand by, make sure that he does not escape, make sure that he has his food, he wants to go to the loo, he wants to drink of water. I had to attend to that.
Yes, you had to attend to that. But given your deep involvement in the investigation,
Yes.
what I'm putting it to you is that in your evidence in chief, you were somewhat ambivalent about whether you were part of the interrogation and putting questions. And you had suggested that the only question you put to him was about the Thursday nights at lunchtime when nobody else was there. And I'm putting it to you that the probabilities are that during the course of the day, you put other questions to Dr. Haffejee. You were part of that interrogation.
My Lord, I have not denied the fact that when Mr. MacDonald questioned me, that I did not say that I was not part of the interrogation team. I did not deny that. But what I am saying is that the questions I had asked him were limited, and that's it.
All right, let's return to the charge office. In your paragraph 63 at page 1749, you give an account of what happened. We don't have to revisit that. But again, you say once the occurrence book entry had been made and a cell allocated to him, we all accompanied him to the cell. And again, why was there a need for all of you to accompany him to the cell? For what possible purpose?
If I recall correctly, Mr. Varney, I think earlier you did ask me that, and I answered that.
Okay, and remind us, what was your answer?
That was normal. I mean, there's nothing odd or uncanny about that.
Well, yes, that was your answer in relation to all of you escorting him to the charge office. Now we're talking about from the charge office to the cell.
Well, from the charge office to the cell, as what I had said previously, because when you asked me when he was going down that landing steps, how did he walk? And there were all four of us.
Yes.
Yes.
And then you have to cross the parking lot, enter the cell block, go through that courtyard, and then you get to the cell itself.
That's correct.
And all of you accompanied him to that cell.
Yes.
And for what purpose? What duties did you have to engage in accompanying him to the cell?
That's just normal to have him, put him into the cell. That's it. There was nothing uncanny about that.
So, is that what security branch officers would typically do? So, say for example, you're at Fisher Street, and you have to take a detainee to Durban North or wherever.
Yes.
You accompany him all the way into the cell.
Yes, we make sure that he's put into the cell, and that the charge of a sergeant closes the grill gate, locks the grill gate, and then closes the outside steel door and locks that steel door. And then when we leave, then the door that opens the cell from the outside, right, the cell proper, so before you enter, make sure that is locked, and then we leave.
You see, I spoke to Brigadier Marion, who had been in the police for more than 40 years before he retired. And he said that's not typical conduct. The typical conduct would be to hand over the detainee to the persons in charge of the cell block. It was their duties to make sure that he was locked up in the cell block, and there's no need for security branch officers to go into the cell itself.
No, my lord, I cannot agree with that. Reason being that probably, with the uniform branch suspects, ordinary criminals, CID suspects, criminals, etc., they'd be handed over to the uniform branch, and then it's up to the uniform branch to make sure that they are properly locked up, etc. But with the security branch, it was different. We had to accompany every detainee into the cell, make sure he's locked up properly, etc., everything's locked, etc., etc., and then leave.
And on your version, it required 4 of you to do that.
No. On this occasion, on Dr. Haffejee, there were 4 of us.
Well, I'm talking about Dr. Haffejee.
Yes, well, there were 4 of us. There was Captain DeToy, Captain Jimmy Taylor, Warrant Officer Governor, myself, and of course we were accompanied by the charge of a sergeant.
Right. So
Yes.
why, in relation to Dr. Haffejee,
Yes.
why were 4 security branch officers required to carry out those duties and get him into the cell block and do the inspection?
Well, I wouldn't say why 4 were required, but we were there, so we took him and put him into the cell.
It wasn't because, in fact, he was in such a debilitated state that 4 of you were needed to help him get to the cell.
No, my lord, that is a lie. That is a lie, my lord.
I mean, even on your version, he was in a desperate state. Surely he needed assistance just to walk.
Well, that's what I say. He walked very, very slowly. He walked very slowly. Captain Jimmy Taylor was.
Yes, but it's also your evidence that he wasn't given any support while walking.
From what I can recall, I can't recall exactly. I mean, this was in 1977.
Well, I must put it to you that if he was in a debilitated state, he would have required assistance in walking. And on your version, he was in that state.
Well, he was in that state, but he did walk.
Now, I want to take you to the evidence that Lieutenant Taylor and Captain DeToy gave in the first inquest. My Lord, I'm going to make reference to...
Sorry, Mr. Van de Beek, before you move away from this paragraph 63, Mr. Kopal, I see that you say, I recall there were other detainees in the holding cells, but you are not referring to the cell into which you lost Dr. Haffejee. You mean in the other cells?
There were, yeah, other cells.
Oh.
Yes.
Just okay. Yes. Sorry, Mr. Van.
And just as a matter of interest, Mr. Kopal, only yesterday a statement was taken from Constable Derek Nordier, and in his statement he says that once the cell register and occurrence book had been logged, Haffejee was taken to the cells by his colleague and himself. He doesn't make any mention of security branch officers. So did Constable Nordier get it wrong in that statement?
That's a lie, my lord. That is a lie.
All right, if I think you have a copy of Volume A, perhaps you can be assisted in that regard. That's a transcript from the first inquest. I just want to deal with the versions of Lieutenant Taylor and Captain Dutoy. My lord, from page 125 of Volume A. And just to save time, I'll just add a little bit of context. On this page, Lieutenant Taylor is talking about what happened after they had allegedly returned from the Durban harbour. And at the top of the page, he says that he confronted Dr. Haffejee with the documents, and counsel for the family says or rather in response to that, he says, well, after some time Captain Dutoy confronted him with a document which had been written in longhand, and the captain was holding this in a certain manner, and unfortunately the copy is not that great.
Okay, so
My Lord, just for the court's assistance,
Did you say page 124?
125.
125.
it's clear in my copy, my
Is
lord.
it clear in your copy? My Lord, unfortunately the record is duplicated several times. My learned junior is in the process of putting together a schedule to show where all those duplications are. But for example, if one looks at page 507, where there's a duplicated version of the transcript, it's much clearer. So I'm going to read from page 507, but it's also the same page 104 from the original transcript. And the gist of it is that Taylor says this document was written by...
Did you say 507?
That's right, my lord.
I think it's one of those pages that was missing.
Okay. All right, we'll stick with page 125 then, and I'll just summarize what's being said.
Okay, I have 5 or 7 here.
Yes, so you'll see that Taylor says Dutoy confronts him with the documents, the handwritten He claims that the deceased said that that was his handwriting. Then there are various other exchanges. But what's important is the question that was posed at the bottom of the page. Well, there's a claim that the deceased went into shock once the document had been produced. And then Advocate Cooper asks, now why wasn't he confronted with this document at an earlier stage? If he had, maybe he would have volunteered the information therein. And then Taylor was asked how many hours after the arrest was he then confronted with the document. Turns out that it was some 13 to 14 hours.
It says here for over 12 hours. Okay, 13 to 14 hours, yes.
And if we then turn to page 130 at the bottom of the page.
130.
130.
Whoa, just one moment. I need to...
After intervention by the presiding officer,
Yes, sorry.
they then agreed that in fact it was even later.
Whereabouts are we reading there, sir?
That confrontation took place at 11 p.m. that night.
Is this
No.
at the top or bottom or center?
At the very bottom of page 130.
Okay, so you had
And
spent...
let me just read it out. So there's some debate as to whether it was 9:30 or 11 p.m. And then there appears to be agreement that in fact it was 11 p.m. So at the bottom of the page where Dr. Cooper says, thank you, about 11 o'clock that night, Taylor says that is correct. He then says, so you had spent more than 12 hours with the deceased without in any way questioning him on the documents. Is that your recollection as well, that he was only confronted with the documents in the last hour of the interrogation?
No, my lord. This, from what I understand, from what I read earlier, is this like took place at Durban Bay?
No, this was after the alleged Durban Bay visit when Taylor and Detroit claimed they had come back to Brighton Beach.
And at what time did they say so, that they came back?
Well, originally around 9:30 p.m. Taylor says that's when they confronted him, but later in his evidence he says the documents were presented to Haffejee at about 11 p.m. that night.
My lord, the testimony given at the first inquest was a lie. It was a lie. Because as far as Durban Bay and the other documentation and the time that they worked out, etc., my lord, that was a blatant lie.
Let me put some further extracts to you, and we can turn to page 134. Mr. Cooper asks, and how long did you spend interrogating him on these documents? His answer, not long thereafter, Your Worship. At the actual confrontation, it was obvious to us that the deceased would not cooperate in this regard. As I said earlier, he refused to answer questions or evaded them, answered them in an evasive fashion, and towards midnight, Captain Dutoy decided that we would call it a day. It was obvious that we weren't going to get any further with the deceased, and the interrogation was halted. So Mr. Cooper says, so the interrogation on the most incriminating documents which you had in your possession was limited to a period of about 1 hour. And Taylor says approximately yes, and Cooper responds, you had spent most of the day dealing with really peripheral matters. Taylor says yes, but including obtaining details of his own personal background and personal history. What's your response to that?
My lord, his questioning did stop before midnight. Exactly what questions were put to him, I cannot recall, but Jimmy Taylor and P.L. du Toit did stop the questioning before midnight.
And on the question of the documents only being produced and confronting Dr. Haffejee, that only took place at around 11 p.m.?
My Lord, the documents that Captain P.L. du Toit had in his file, those documents had already been obtained from the flat. Those documents had already been obtained from the flat, and of course, the file that was built up over those months, those documents as well. So those documents were already in his possession.
Yes.
And documents from his file, from his flat were already in.
Well, firstly, let me ask you, was Dr. Haffejee ever confronted with those documents during the interrogation?
Yes.
And did that happen towards the end of the interrogation, around 11 p.m.?
No, this was during the course of the day, during the early hours of the evening, late at night.
And he was also confronted with the conversations that you had
Absolutely.
recorded on the tomato?
Absolutely.
And in fact, were you surprised that they were stopping the interrogation at midnight when they hadn't, extracted anything of value from Dr. Haffejee, given that you were aware that there could be, bombs going off at any moment?
My Lord, look, they decided to stop the questioning, the interrogation just before midnight, and I wasn't surprised to that because that's what happened.
So they were aware that bombs could go off, but they were happy to stop the interrogation, even though they had no information on the possibility of people being hurt and killed through bombings.
I can't comment on that, my Lord, because I don't know what was flowing through their minds at that point in time. May I please sit?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So then on page 135, Taylor says he was then taken to the charge office and placed in the cell. That's also somewhat unclear. There's a clearer version of the original page 114.
Page 135 at, where about is information, sir?
So page 135 at the
Yes.
top.
On top. I've got you in the course of the
Yes,
following.
no, I'll read it to you.
Okay.
So essentially Taylor's saying that they were now taken to the cell, give them an opportunity to think about it. And I quote, Cooper asked, now again, as far as the interrogation about these documents is concerned, only you and Captain du Toit were present at the interrogation. And Taylor says that is correct. Cooper says there were no other persons. Taylor says no other person, no. He then denies applying third-degree methods. And then further down the page, Taylor says just after midnight, he was taken down the corridor. So there he seems to be confirming what you are saying, to where the charge office is situated. So that would seem to confirm your early, and I think Indian Constable Gopal. All of our staff returned to the Brighton Beach police station. These other members met us in the passageway and accompanied us down the passage to the charge office. What's your response to that?
My Lord, that is a lie. That's a very big lie. Because that's not how everything panned out.
Are you saying you were never sent out of the police station at night?
No, at night, no. Because only time I left was during that lunch break and I came back. And then Sergeant Governor went out and he came back. But this version over here, it's the very first time that I actually read it. And this did not happen like the way he says it happened.
So why would Lieutenant Taylor, and as we'll see shortly, Captain du Toit as well, want to place you and your colleagues out of Brighton Police Station during this late night period of time?
Doesn't make sense at all. Just as what he says on top there. Only you and Captain du Toit were present at the interrogation. And Jimmy Taylor says that is correct, which is a lie. Which is a lie.
And Cooper also asks, why were all of them necessary to accompany you to the charge office? Taylor responds, these members were involved in the investigations and they weren't required to accompany us as such. It was just that Captain du Toit called them back to the police station and they arrived at that very moment as we were on our way to the charge office. And he says, had they been doing our investigations concerning the matters you were dealing with, in relation to Haffejee presumably? And the answer is, that is correct. Is that also a lie?
That did not pan out like the way he says it panned out. Never did happen. Where he says, had they been out doing investigations concerning the matter that you were dealing with, then that is correct. But that is a lie. That is a lie. Because nobody had to leave Brighton Beach and go out and start an investigation or continue an investigation when Dr. Haffejee was already with us and we were there.
Yes, it's curious that both Taylor and du Toit put you and your colleagues
Yes.
out of the interrogation room
Yes.
for a period of time, only returning just
Yes.
before the man is taken to the charge office.
Absolutely, my lord. Because
And why do you think they would want to place you out of the interrogation room at that time?
the only thing that I can think about, I don't know, my lord. Maybe. I'm just like surmising. I can't really. I think, although we were prepared to appear before to give evidence to the inquest, well, at the inquest, but maybe to avoid us away from Brighton Beach Police Station, or whatever was going on in their minds.
I think you are onto something there.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Something happened in that period of time, and perhaps in their minds, given that on your version they were fabricating a story,
Yes,
they were concerned that maybe yourself and your colleagues
yes,
could be called to appear in the inquest.
yes,
And if both the senior officers say, well, all the other staff were away during this period of time, then you couldn't be questioned on what happened at that period of time.
but besides that, my lord, remember when I had mentioned that Captain du Toit had made audio cassettes and gave us our version of what we must state.
Yes, we're aware of that. We know that you were asked to fabricate the Durban
Yes,
Harbour
yes,
visit. You don't
yes,
have to repeat
yes,
that.
but no, Mr. Varney, what I'm getting to is that part of information, had we been called into to testify, and had we said that would not click with what they are already informed the court,
Well, not
the court
necessarily,
about.
because they were saying that Durban Harbour visit happened earlier in the evening, and you were back at about 9:30 p.m. So that doesn't necessarily follow.
Well, that is a lie too, my lord.
But we know that know
Yes.
that the Durban Harbour visit
Yes.
didn't happen.
Yeah.
But what I am putting it to you is that something did happen towards the end of that night of interrogation, which the two officers did not want you and your colleagues to talk to anybody about, or worse, to even testify about. And so my question is, what happened towards the end of that night? And I want to put it to you that matters intensified towards the end of that night.
That's why I'm saying, my lord, that I was there. It's not a case that I was sent away.
Yes, but it was more than simply being there. Something bad happened towards the end of that night. And if we rely on the medical evidence of the two forensic experts called by the state, the man was either debilitated, could barely move, or probably dead by that time.
No, my lord, absolutely not. That did not happen at all. Not like the way counsel puts it.
Mr. Varner?
My lord, is this a good time for the long adjournment?
I think so, yes. Proceed at 2 o'clock.
As the court pleases.
Court is adjourned.
All right.
Sorry.
I get through.